6 years later, I walked into the hallway but wondered whether I am dreaming or am I awake. What am I saying? Of course it's a dream. It's been a recurring dream since I came to live with the Dixons and changed my identity. However, I always get woken up by this dream, and it's always at the same part of the dream. Hello, Mom, Dad, Shane, Sophia? I yell while in our apartment in San Francisco. Then I stopped in the living room and saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner. Hello. The shadowy figure turns and looks at me with bloodstains on his lips. I abruptly realized it is Nathaniel standing in front of me. He smiled while his fangs were visible and said, "Hi, time to go, bitch." Then he lunged towards me and I jolted awake in my bed and looked around. I realized I was still asleep at Nolan's. I looked over and saw Nolan sleeping next to me. He must be used to me screaming in the middle of the night by now. I got up and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I walked into the kitchen and saw Jacqueline. She handed me a glass of water and I sat in a chair across from her. Her long brown hair was covering her face. I leaned down, rested my chin on my arms placed on the counter, and said, "God, I wish I was normal." Jacqueline smirked and laughed. She said, "Believe it or not, you are. If you didn't have PTSD due to everything you went through, I wouldn't think you to be normal." However, I am shocked Nolan didn't come up here instead of you. I rolled my eyes and said he was still asleep. She took a deep breath and said, "Oh well, I guess it's a good sign." I smiled at her and asked, "Are you telling this to me?" She smiled in relief and said, "Oh, I am amazed no one has found out about your whereabouts yet, especially Nathaniel, when he is supposed to start looking for you." I looked up straight into her eyes and said, "Today." I dropped my head and she asked, "Have you noticed them?" I glanced at her and said, "No, but I know about them being around me, as my emblem's been glowing recently." She smiled and said, "Well, they probably didn't see you, so it's good." I nodded and said, "I guess." She said reassuringly, "It's a good thing." I looked down and said, "He still has 2 days left, so it's not good. It's been 6 years and they still haven't tracked you," Jacqueline said. I smirked and said, "We will see about it soon enough." I smirked and said, "We will see about it soon enough." She pushed her chair back, and I asked, "Going back to bed?" She stood, walked towards her bedroom, and said, "Yes, we are now going back to bed. You have to attend school in the morning, and you also have to pick up Colleen." I smiled and walked back to Nolan's room. When I walked in, I saw Nolan propped up on his elbows looking at me. He asked, "Are you okay?" "Sorry, I didn't wake up to comfort you." I crawled back under the covers. I looked at Nolan and admired his features, including his perfect jawline and bright blue eyes, as he continued watching me. Then I said, "I'm fine, and I told you that at least one of us needs to be able to sleep." He closed his eyes, let out a breath, and said, "I know, but it's hard to remain asleep when the person you love is having nightmares and is scared." Then Nolan kissed me softly on the lips. I snickered and said, "Haha, well, I love you too." He looked at me with an impressive look and said, "They are not going to take you. I refuse to believe they one day will." I glanced into his eyes and asked, "Has your mom always had PTSD?" He thought for a moment before he said, "I don't know." I realized it for the first time when you had started staying in the house about my mom waking up at about the same time as you do. He looked at me with happiness in his eyes. He said, "However, she managed to keep it hidden from me for a long while." I laughed and rolled over so my head was against his chest. He rolled onto his side, pulled me closer to him, and both of us fell asleep. I woke up with the alarm clock buzzing. I felt Nolan lean over me to stop it. I reached for him, pulled him back towards me, and kissed him. He pulled away and said, "Why, hello." He smiled, got up, and walked out of the room. I looked around wishing I didn't have to get up. However, as it is Friday and we had to attend school, I need to get up as I also need to pick up Colleen. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, walked over to my bag, and dug out a clean t-shirt on which my favorite quote is written, "Live life to the fullest." I guess in my opinion, it's what I have been trying to do. I don't know what will happen eventually, but I am trying to do anything until something in my life changes for the better or worse. As I was getting ready, I heard Nolan walking towards the bedroom. So I quickly took off my dirty hailstorm shirt and wore a clean one. He walked through the door and looked at me as I pulled down my pants. I then grabbed a new pair of pants and wore them. He smiled as he saw me change my clothes. He said, "Why are you so shy in front of me? I can see you naked whenever we are having sex. I stood awkwardly and said, I know, but I am just a human, remember? Well, for the most part. He smirked and said, I know, but you don't need to worry. I think you are gorgeous no matter what. I smiled and nodded in agreement. Then he leaned down to be at eye level with me and smiled. He started to bring my face closer to his, pressed his lips against mine, picked me up, and I wrapped my legs around his waist, but I pulled away. He frowned and asked, what's wrong? I looked down and said, I need to pick up Colleen. He smiled and said, damn, so no morning sex. I took a deep breath and nodded my head in the negative. He grinned widely and said, all right, I will pick you up from the Dixon's household, Miss Jenson. I rolled my eyes and said, it's Dixon now, remember? I've been Nyla Dixon for the last 6 years. He laughed and said, I know. I just like your original name better than Dixon. He laughed again as I pulled myself back. I laughed and said, I was hoping they wouldn't be able to find me, so I wouldn't have to live through the nightmarish phase of my life ever again. A serious look got etched on his face as he said, they haven't found you yet, and they won't. I looked up and said, I hope this turns out to be true. He pulled me into a hug and said, they won't. I eyed him through my lashes and asked, how can you be so sure about it? He smiled and said, I don't know. However, you need to head out and pick up Colleen. Now, here are your keys, babe. I reached for them and he hid them behind his back. Then, when he saw the annoyed expression on my face, he leaned down and kissed me again. Then he handed me the keys. I smiled and said, I love you. He smiled as he released me and said, I love you too. See you in a while. Buckle up and be safe and don't worry about anything. I looked up and said, Dear Lord, is it what you do all day? He looked at me, feeling confused, and asked, do what? I smiled and asked, do you worry about me? He grinned and said, yep, but you must go now. I quickly kissed him and nodded in agreement. Then I walked out to my car. I opened the door and settled myself inside and felt a shooting pain in my arm around the emblem. I looked up and I saw a person smiling at me. I closed the door and started the car and drove off. I don't know who the guy was, but he had a sinister smile etched on his face, and nothing else was visible. However, I had a terrible feeling about it being a member of the Dark Hearts.